My name is Eleanor Hayes. I am 74 years old. And though I have lived through births, deaths, and decades of quiet changes, there is one sound I will never forget. The hiss of paper burning, the words of my mother curling into ash before my eyes. It was a gray winter afternoon in 1983. The kind where the sky hangs low, heavy with clouds, and the house feels colder no matter how high you turn the furnace. I had just finished making tea when the faint smell of smoke threaded its way into the kitchen. First I thought it was the chimney. Then I heard the sound, the sharp crackle of flames, the low hiss of something being consumed. I knew instantly. My heart stuttered as I rushed down the hallway toward the den. The door was open, and through the threshold I saw him. Richard. My husband sat in his chair by the fireplace, his face lit by the glow of orange flames. In his hand was a bundle of folded paper, edges yellowed with age. Letters. My mother's letters. No! My voice ripped from me, raw and strangled as I lunged forward. He didn't flinch. Didn't look ashamed. He held the paper high, fed it to the fire, and watched it curl into black. Behind him in the doorway stood Thomas, her son. Barely 18, tall like his father, arms crossed over his chest. His lips curled into a smirk as he watched me stumble into the room. "Stop it!" I cried, falling to my knees by the hearth, reaching into the flames with desperate hands until the heat forced me back. My tears blurred the sight of them, my mother's words, her handwriting, her love, disappearing into smoke. Richard finally looked at me. His eyes were cold, his jaw set. "They're poison, Eleanor. Nothing but her voice in your head keeping you weak. It's time you let go." I shook my head violently, sobs tearing through me. They were hers. They were all I had left of her. From the doorway came a sound that cut deeper than the flames. Laughter. Thomas chuckled, low and cruel, the kind of laugh that wasn't born from humor but from satisfaction. My head snapped toward him. His face was his father's, his smirk sharp, his eyes glittering with something I had never seen before, delight in my pain. "Dad's right," he sneered. "You sound pathetic, crying over scraps of paper. No wonder you cling to them, it's all you've got." My chest constricted. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. I wanted to scream at him, to shake him, to demand how he could laugh at something so sacred. But the words stuck in my throat, choked by grief. I turned back to the fire, watching helplessly as the last of the letters disappeared into ash. My mother's voice, her wisdom, her comfort, erased by the man I married, mocked by the son I raised. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the crackle of flames and Thomas's faint snickering. Felt hollow, stripped bare. But then, in the pit of that despair, something stirred. Because what Richard didn't know, what Thomas couldn't possibly guess, was that I hadn't given him all of them. I had kept one letter, tucked carefully into a book on the highest shelf, hidden away like a secret flame. And in that letter, my mother had written something Richard would never understand. Something Thomas had yet to learn. As I wiped my tears and stared at the fire, my grief hardened into resolve. They thought they had silenced her. They thought they had silenced me. But one day I would make them listen. And when that day came, it would not be in the quiet of this house. It would be in a place where silence was impossible. Real quick, subscribe and share your thoughts below before we get to the part that still makes my heart race. People see betrayal as one act, one sharp blade to the heart. But the truth is, betrayal often begins as a series of small cuts, so subtle you don't notice you're bleeding until you look down and see you're covered in wounds. My first cut came not from Richard, not even from Thomas, but from the silence in this house the moment my mother passed away. I was 26 when she died. A winter storm swept in, and the pneumonia took her before the doctor could even reach the house. I still remember the way the snowflakes clung to her windowpane as if they, too, were reluctant to leave her side. My mother had been my anchor, She was a woman of quiet strength, hands worn from years of sewing and gardening, voice soft but steady. She wrote to me constantly, letters filled with encouragement, recipes, advice, and little pieces of wisdom. "Eleanor," she would say in ink, "the world will try to make you small. Do not let it succeed. Your voice matters." Those letters carried me through the lonely months of early marriage, through the isolation of raising a child in a town where Richard's family name outweighed my own. Every time I felt invisible, I would open one and feel her presence again. But Richard never liked them. First, he only teased. "What's she telling you now? How to bake bread better than mine? How to run this house?" His tone was light, almost playful, but his eyes held something sharper. Later, the teasing grew into complaints. "She meddles too much. You cling too much to her. You're not a girl anymore, Eleanor. You're my wife now. Your loyalty should be to me, not to her words." I brushed it off, told myself he didn't understand. But the cracks began to show. He resented that those letters gave me strength. He resented that her voice carried weight even from beyond the grave. And he despised that there was a part of me he couldn't control. When Thomas was born, the distance between us widened further. Richard adored him at first, parading him around, boasting of his strong grip, his quick eyes. But as Thomas grew, Richard's adoration twisted into expectation. The boy was to be molded in his father's image. Strong, hard, unyielding. And slowly, Thomas learned the rules of this house. Laugh at softness, dismiss tenderness, mock vulnerability. I tried to counter it. I read my mother's letters aloud sometimes, hoping Thomas would absorb the lessons. "Be kind," she had written. "The measure of a man is not his strength, but how he uses it to protect." But Richard always interrupted, scoffing. "Nonsense. The world respects power, not kindness. Don't fill the boy's head with weakness." Thomas would watch, torn between us, but as the years passed, he leaned more toward his father's side. Children learn quickly who has the louder voice, the heavier hand. By the time he was 16, he carried himself with Richard's arrogance, his laughter sharp and dismissive. When I tried to talk to him, he rolled his eyes. When I shared my mother's words, he smirked. The letters became my last refuge. Late at night, when the house was still, I'd take them from their box, unfold the pages, and breathe in the faint scent of ink and lavender that lingered on them. I'd trace her handwriting with trembling fingers, remembering the sound of her voice, the way she used to cup my face and say, "You are stronger than you believe." But Richard noticed. He always noticed. "You hide behind those letters," he accused one night, his voice cold. "You think she knows better than me. You think she should still be running this family from the grave." "They're memories," I whispered, clutching the box to my chest. "They're all I have left of her." "They're poison," he spat. "And I won't let her voice matter more than mine." That was when the fear began, the fear that one day he would act on those words. That one day he would take from me the one thing he couldn't control. And when it happened, when I walked into that den and saw the fire devouring her handwriting, I realized that betrayal doesn't happen all at once. It's years of small cuts finally breaking the skin wide open. But even as the flames consumed nearly everything, even as Thomas's cruel laughter carved a scar I will never forget, one truth flickered in the back of my mind. I still had one letter. Hidden high on a shelf, tucked into an old cookbook Richard never touched. One letter that he had never seen. One letter that carried her truest words. And one day when the time was right, I would let him, and Thomas, hear them. Before we go any further, click subscribe and let me know in the comments. What would you have done in my shoes? The house smelled of ash for days. No matter how many windows I opened, how many times I scrubbed the hearth, the scent clung to the walls, a ghost of what I had lost. Every time I passed the den, I heard the crackle of flames, saw the letters curling in my mind's eye. But I also knew something Richard and Thomas did not. One letter had survived. I had hidden it months earlier, tucked into the pages of The Joy of Cooking, a book Richard never touched. It was a letter my mother had written during the last year of her life, the words heavier, sharper than the others. She had written of resilience, of facing cruelty with courage, of truth rising no matter how deep it was buried. That letter became my secret fire. For weeks I said nothing. I played the part Richard expected. Quiet, subdued, moving through the house like a shadow. Thomas smirked at me when he passed, certain I had been broken. Richard seemed lighter, almost smug, as though by burning those letters he had erased not only my mother's presence but my own. What they didn't know was that silence is not the same as surrender. Every night after they slept, I climbed the creaking chair to reach the cookbook shelf. I slid the envelope from its hiding place and unfolded the paper with trembling hands. My mother's handwriting swirled across the page, faintly faded but still strong. I read the words again and again. Eleanor, remember this. They can take what you own, they can try to break what you love, but they cannot take your truth. The truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how long it's buried. One day when you speak it, they will have no power left. Those words stitched me back together. The first stage of my plan was patience. Revenge whispered to me in the dark. Expose them now, scream the truth to anyone who would listen, drag them through the same fire they had dragged me through. But I knew it wasn't enough to lash out. Not yet. They needed to be exposed in the right place at the right time, where they could not twist or deny what they had done. The second stage was protection. I made copies of the letter. Quietly, carefully. At the public library, I used the old copier, feeding coins into the machine, the hum of its light bar scanning the paper filling me with both fear and resolve. I placed one copy in a safety deposit box, another in the hands of a trusted cousin who lived out of town, and one more hidden under the floorboard in my bedroom. If Richard ever discovered the original, he would still never be able to erase the truth. The third stage was planning the stage. It had to be public, something undeniable. Not whispered to a neighbor, not muttered in anger during a family argument. It had to be in front of eyes that mattered, in a setting Richard valued, where Thomas would be forced to hear and not laugh. The opportunity came quietly. That spring, Richard's extended family announced they were hosting the annual Heritage Dinner at the town's banquet hall, a grand event where cousins, aunts, uncles, and children gathered to celebrate family legacy. Richard always relished those nights. He would stand tall, boasting about his successes, bragging about Thomas's grades, sneering at others' shortcomings. It was his arena, his stage. And it would be mine. The fourth stage was steel. I practiced night after night, reading the letter aloud. My voice shook at first, thick with tears, but each time it grew steadier. I imagined Thomas's smirk fading. I imagined Richard's face draining of color. I imagined the hush of the crowd as my mother's words filled the hall. Each night, as I folded the letter back into its envelope, I felt stronger. Not unbroken, the scars were still there, the grief still raw, but stronger. The final stage was resolve. There were nights I doubted myself. Nights Richard's voice in my head hissed, "You're weak. You're nothing without me." Nights I wondered if Thomas would ever see me as anything but pathetic. Well, I would fight. Not with fists, not with fire, but with the one weapon Richard and Thomas underestimated most: truth. When the night of the Heritage Dinner drew near, I slipped the letter into my purse. Its weight was small, but it carried decades of strength. I pictured it clearly. The long banquet table, the clinking of glasses, Richard standing to make his speech, Thomas grinning beside him. And then me rising quietly, holding the letter. My mother's words would not just be heard, they would be undeniable. And when that moment came, Richard's fire would mean nothing. Thomas's laughter would die on his lips. Because the truth he tried to burn was about to burn him instead. The banquet hall smelled like polished wood and roasted rosemary. Crystal glasses lined the tables, napkins folded into stiff little crowns. The whole Hayes clan had poured in for the heritage dinner, glowing with the kind of pride that looks best under chandeliers. Every seat had a name card. Every name card sat beneath the weight of expectation. Thomas arrived beside his father, taller than I remembered, shoulders squared like armor, jaw set in that familiar Hayes line. Richard shook hands, lifted chins, told stories that made him the hero in every scene. When anyone mentioned me, he nodded as if I were a pleasant footnote. I sat 2 tables back, quiet in a navy dress, a small leather purse in my lap. Inside it, the envelope. The paper had a warmth to it now, as if it had absorbed the heat of all the times I had unfolded and refolded it in the dark. We smiled. We listened to a cousin recite family dates as if they were scripture. At last, the host tapped a spoon to his glass and invited Richard to speak. The room stilled as my husband rose, chest proud, eyes shining with the reflection of 100 approving faces. Family, he began, voice smooth, the kind of smooth that hides sharp edges. We are a long line of builders. We know how to let go of what drags us down. We know how to look forward. Plus, he loved the sound of it. He thrived on rooms like this, rooms that let him arrange himself like a portrait. He spoke of legacy and strength. He spoke of discipline. He spoke of sons who know their place. When he finished, the host gestured for the next item, a toast from the youngest generation. The program had Thomas's name. He stood, lips curling in a confident half-smile, gaze sweeping the room like a lighthouse beam. That was my moment. I rose before he could speak and lifted a hand. May I borrow the microphone a moment, please? Hush. A few heads turned, surprised. The host glanced at Richard. My husband's smile tightened. Permission, Eleanor, he said lightly. And the room chuckled because they always chuckled when he performed control as a joke. The host handed me the microphone anyway. My palms were damp, but my voice was steady. Tonight is about legacy, I said. And there is a voice in this family that was nearly erased. Before we celebrate a line of builders, I would like you to hear the woman who built me. I turned to Thomas and extended the envelope. Please read this aloud. He stared at it as if it were a trick card. His gaze flicked to his father. Richard's jaw worked once, a small pulse at the temple. Let her have her moment. His expression seemed to say, she will run out of breath. I kept the envelope held steady. Thomas took it, a little laugh flicking at the edge of his mouth, and slid the letter free. The paper was creased and soft, the ink slightly faded and blue. He began to read. Eleanor, my girl. The room shifted. The sound of forks against plates stopped. I watched the letter pass through my son's voice and travel out into the open air like a song that had been locked in a drawer too long. I know the world will try to make you small. It will tell you that silence is dignity and that swallowing your pain is strength. It will try to dim your kindness and call it weakness. If you ever feel someone tugging you toward darkness with polished words, remember this. Love does not fear your voice. A woman near the head table pressed her fingers to her lips. Somewhere behind me, a chair creaked as someone leaned forward. Thomas shifted his weight. He kept reading, his tone flatter now. If a man ever tries to turn your memories into ash, he is not strong. He is afraid. If a son ever learns to laugh at his mother's tears, he has learned from someone who does not understand love. When that day comes, hand him my words. Make him look at what fire cannot burn. Truth keeps its own light. Thomas's voice faltered. He glanced at me, eyes flicking with something I had not seen in years. Then he looked back at the page quickly and swallowed. You are allowed to grieve what is gone. You are allowed to keep what keeps you whole. You are allowed to say no to anyone who confuses control with care. If they call you dramatic, stand taller. If they call you fragile, show them what endures. I believe in you with every stitch of me. And if anyone asks who taught you to speak, tell them your mother did, and her mother before her. A murmur moved around the room, a current gathering strength. Thomas's cheek had grown pale. His throat bobbed. He lifted the page a little higher, as if he could hide behind it. One more thing, the letter went on. If they ever try to shame you for loving me, remind them that love is not a leash. Remind them that burning a letter only makes smoke. The words remain wherever the heart has kept them. If you need to read this to them, make them hear me. Make them hear you. Silence fell so complete I could hear the soft hum of the exit lights. Thomas lowered the page. He stood there with my mother's voice in his hands and my mother's words in his mouth, and an entire family looking at him as if they finally saw us clearly. His eyes shone too bright, as if he had only now realized what the laughter in the den had sounded like to a woman kneeling on a rug near flame. He turned to me, voice rough. Mom, I did not know. I let him sit with that. The microphone trembled a little in my hand, not with fear, but with a long breath leaving a body that had been holding it for years. I looked at Richard. He had the practiced face of a man who believes he can outwait a storm. Then a small crack opened at the corner of his mouth, and in that crack I saw it, fury meeting something it could not push down. A cousin stood up. Eleanor, those letters were hers to keep, he said quietly. His wife nodded, eyes wet. An aunt cleared her throat and fixed Richard with a look I had not seen since the old matriarchs were alive. We do not burn what a woman needs to stand upright, she said. Another voice from the far table. Tom, a man said gently to my son. If my boy laughed at his mother that way, I would spend the rest of my life teaching him how to make it right. Thomas flinched as if the words had touched skin. He turned toward me fully now. I'm sorry, he said. Came out too soft for the back of the room, but I heard it. He swallowed and tried again, louder. I'm sorry. I was cruel. I let him teach me the wrong lessons. Richard surged to his feet. Enough, he snapped. This is a spectacle. He pointed at me. You have poisoned this family for years with nostalgia and weakness. Do not pretend a page of ink changes anything. I stepped closer, the microphone low at my side so only our table would hear me. It changes everything, Richard, because tonight the words are not locked in a box or trapped in my throat. Tonight the room knows who burned and who kept. He stared at me, rage searching for a familiar place to land, finding none. Those moments feel longer than they are. In them you can almost watch a man choose whether to double down or sit down. He chose the first. He scoffed, spread his hands to the room, and tried to laugh. No one joined him. The quiet expanded around him like a border. People looked down at their plates. Others looked at me. Someone near the door stood to leave, shaking his head. I watched the applause that had always been ready for Richard dry up like a riverbed in heat. Thomas looked at his father, then at me, then at the letter in his hand. He folded it carefully as if it might tear and held it out to me. I covered his hand with mine and pushed it gently back. Keep it, I said. He blinked. His voice was smaller now, the voice of a child who had been louder than his wisdom for too long. I do not deserve it. You do if you learn from it, I said. The host cleared his throat carefully. Perhaps, he began, we can use the rest of our evening to remember the kind of legacy we want to claim. He nodded toward me. Would you like to close, Eleanor? I lifted the microphone. This is not a speech, I said. Just an answer. Years ago my husband burned my letters from my mother while my son laughed. Tonight my son read the one that survived. That is what truth does when you stop burying it. Survives. Changes the room. Few people clapped. And more. It was not a victory cheer. It was something steadier. Promise. Richard left first. He pushed his chair back so hard it scraped across the floor and rattled against a table leg. He did not look back. He moved through the quiet like a man trying to outrun a mirror. The door swung shut behind him with a hollow thump. When the applause faded, relatives came in twos and threes. They touched my arm. They said her name. They told me about the way she used to laugh, how she once sewed hems at a wedding when the bride's dress betrayed her. The memories moved through the hall like warm air after a long winter. Thomas stood on the edge of it, letter folded in his hands, shame sitting heavy on his shoulders. It would be easy to end with forgiveness too quickly, to wrap it in a bow the way people like stories to end. But this was not a bow. This was a beginning. I took his hand and felt the shake in it. "You hurt me," I said. He nodded, eyes filling. "I will not pretend it did not happen to make you comfortable." He nodded again, tears slipping. "But if you are willing to learn, then we will learn together." He closed his eyes and breathed, not the breath of a man performing sorrow, but the breath of a boy waking from a long lesson that had led him far from himself. When he opened them, he looked like my son again. We left the hall under a sky that had turned glassy with stars. The air was cool, the kind that slides under collars and makes you lift your chin. I felt taller than I had on the night of the fire, taller than I had in the years of the slow cuts, taller than I had in my own kitchen when smoke threaded the ceiling and laughter cut the air. At home I placed my purse on the table and pulled out a small stack of envelopes. During the planning I had made copies not only for safekeeping but for this moment. I handed one to Thomas. One to my cousin who had stood first. One to the aunt with the matriarch's stare. The last I slid into the drawer where the matches used to live. Reminder. Shield. Days passed. Reputation rearranged itself. Some relatives chose distance from Richard rather than from me. Others called to say they were sorry they had not noticed, sorry they had not asked, sorry they had thought strength looked like hardness. And when someone asked whether the letter had been dramatic, I told them what I had told the room. Truth is not dramatic. It simply refuses to lie down. Richard tried once to summon the old balance. He showed up on the porch with an apology that felt like a door left slightly ajar. I told him I did not need his words. I needed changed behavior and distance. He frowned, called me stubborn, and left. I watched him go with the kind of relief that feels almost like grief, because you are burying what you hoped a person could be. Thomas came by often. He read that letter many times. Once, I found him at the kitchen table with his head bent over it, lips moving. When he looked up, his face was wet and unguarded. "I am learning," he said. "Show me the rest of who she was." I did. We cooked her soup, the one with thyme that always made winter feel less sharp. We mended a shirt by hand the way she had taught me. We said her name out loud without flinching. I keep the original letter in a new place now. Not hidden. Framed in simple wood on the wall beside the window where afternoon light spills in and warms the ink. Visitors pause at it. Some ask to read. Some simply stand there a moment and close their eyes as if the paper hums. When I pass it, I touch the frame lightly. Not as a relic. As a living thing. I think of the hiss of paper burning, how small it made me feel. Then I think of my son's voice in that hall, carrying my mother out into a room that had always been too loud with the wrong people. I think of the way the silence afterward was not absence but arrival. Space made for truth. They tried to burn what kept me whole. They laughed while they did it. In the end, the laughing stopped. The fire could not finish its work. The words remained. They stood up in a room full of witnesses and did what words do when they are finally given air. They changed the story. That is the legacy I claim. Not the one that parades or postures, but the one that remembers and refuses to be erased. If anyone asks who taught me to speak, I will point to that letter. And if anyone asks how I made them listen, I will tell them this. I did not shout. I did not shake. I handed truth to the person who once laughed at it and asked him to read. And when he did, the whole room heard who we really were. They thought fire could erase her voice. My husband thought control was strength. My son thought cruelty was power. But truth survived. And when my son read that one hidden letter aloud, their power crumbled in front of the very family they had fooled for years. You cannot burn truth. You cannot silence love. And you cannot laugh away the voice of a mother who refuses to disappear. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel. Share these stories. Help keep alive the voices that others tried to erase. Because the louder we tell them, the harder they are to bury.